I'm currently on a cruise and I'm staying in the smallest cabin on the entire ship. It has a feature that I've never seen on a cruise ship before, and although my cabin is inside, it definitely isn't what you think of when you think of an inside cabin. I've spent most of this week trying to work out why this cabin exists at all and if it was worth the price that I paid for it. Booking a cabin without any outside space definitely was a gamble because our cruise is spending a full 8 days at sea and the weather has been far worse than I imagined. I knew that this ship was 20 years old, so I hoped that nothing in the cabin would be broken or damaged. As with every cruise I've ever taken, I'd heard so many horror stories about broken toilets and air conditioning. I really didn't want to be stuck in a scruffy room feeling unwell for 8 days. I knew when booking this cruise that I wanted to keep the price as low as possible, but I also didn't want to risk getting a cabin in a location that would have more movement. When I was looking at the deck plans, I saw that there were inside cabins that appeared as though they looked out over the atrium. The biggest issue with inside cabins is that there's no natural light and they can feel claustrophobic. I wondered if this window would help with that. I doubted it, but honestly, as it only cost £25 extra for the entire week, I thought that it was worth a go. I just hoped that it wouldn't make me feel more claustrophobic. I figured even if the window was no help, I would be right in the middle of the ship and watching people walk around would be fun. In reality, the problems we had weren't ones that we imagined pre-cruise at all, but more about that later. We embarked the ship a little later than planned because of an illness outbreak on the cruise before R1. The positive of that though was because we boarded later, our cabins were already ready for us. I was cruising on the ship with my parents who had a balcony cabin up on deck 11, so we headed there first to take a quick look out at New York City before the sun set. That is something that my cabin definitely wouldn't have. I love the look of the cabin, and although the ship is fairly old by cruise ship standards, she didn't seem in a bad way at all. There were a few scuffs around of course, but overall I was pretty impressed, and this balcony space definitely was nice. On my parents' last Cunard cruise, they found a big bra down the back of one of the drawers, but no such luck this time. It might seem as though this cabin would be much better than mine, but honestly I wouldn't have wanted to upgrade to this cabin. As the cruise went on, we hit bad weather, and the benefits of a cabin location really became apparent. I assumed that my cabin would be similar in design, but I didn't think that we would have this separate seating area. I was right about that. Heading down to deck 6, we were very excited to pick up our cruise cards that were outside the room to let ourselves in. I first noticed the lovely blue and the gold colours on the bed, and although the room did seem quite compact, it had everything in it that I would expect from an inside cabin. I struggled a little bit with the fiddly blind, but I did eventually get it open. I saw that we could see into the cabins opposite, but that everybody else had their blinds down. There were 2 blinds, there's a wooden one and a fabric one. I really wanted to find someone to wave at some point during this cruise, but at this point it really didn't seem as though the people opposite me shared my goal, so I decided to make that my cruise mission. Looking down, I could see a few people, but only if I really tried to. I had to stand on my tiptoes and lean down to see them. I could see a piano at the bottom, and I wondered if they might do anything in this atrium during our cruise. Cunard aren't really known for nightlife, but the last time I cruised with Cunard, I was right below a nightclub and it was really quite noisy. The beds looked very comfortable, and I was happy to see that we had a kettle and we had biscuits. This was a lovely British touch, as are the UK plug sockets. At first, they gave us entirely coconut biscuits, which I think is worse than no biscuits at all, but my brother very kindly ate those so that they would be replaced with something else. I'm sure I could have requested other biscuits if I wanted to, but there is so much food on this ship that was definitely not a priority. There's also a minibar, a fridge and a safe. There is a TV too, although we haven't really used that during the cruise. It was around now that our bags arrived and we started to unpack. Cunard are a formal cruise line, so I had packed a lot more than I normally would. For most days on this cruise, I've had a daytime outfit and then also a separate evening outfit. I also had masquerade masks in my bag, which definitely isn't something I'd usually bring along on a cruise. These bells would jingle when we hit rough seas later on, but I would usually just throw a jumper on them or something to try and get them to be quiet. The cabin definitely did feel a little smaller than other inside cabins that I've stayed in, but we each had a couple of drawers and there were 2 wardrobes, so we took one of those each. For the week, this was totally fine for us, but I do know people who have taken world cruises in cabins just like this, and I think that that would be a stretch. I suppose in that situation, you would just have to take advantage of the laundry service. There is also a self-service laundry on board, which is nice, and the washing pods are included too, which is cool. Normally you have to pay for those. I'm staying in this cabin with my brother, so I was happy to see that the beds were made up as 2 twins. That said though, not even Captain Hudson could fit between between these beds, so I decided to do a little bit of rearranging to give us more space. I pushed the table into the corner and then pushed my bed further to the side. Our room steward would push them back every day when she made the beds, and I would push them apart again. It was like a silent battle. Whenever we were in the cabin, we would just sat on our beds anyway, so it didn't really matter that everything was kind of squashed in this corner. I'm lucky that my brother and I share a cabin very well, because I think it would be tricky to share a space like this with somebody who's on a different schedule or someone who is overly messy. One thing that I thought might make us annoy each other though was the plug socket situation. I've been on cruises in the past on cruise ships as old as this where there's only been one plug socket in the entire cabin. I'm happy to say that our cabin did have 2 UK sockets and 2 US sockets, so we both had some. I'm glad that this one was upside down. That's a great idea because my MacBook charger did not fit in the other one. It was around now that nature called, so I decided to go and check out the bathroom. It was a fair size and perfectly clean, perfectly functional. Nothing seemed damaged at all, but there was a shower curtain, which I know a lot of people hate. I just upgraded last year from a shower curtain to a shower screen in my own home, so I can't say that it bothers me too much. I noticed that the bottom part of the shower was quite deep, and that is something that would come in handy later. When I had a shower, this would fill up with water. It wouldn't ever spill out into the room, but it was kind of like standing in a paddling pool. Cunard provide all the beddings and the towels in the cabins, and they even provide flannels, which is a nice touch. Your Britishism of the week is the word flannel. These are flannels. I think in other places you call them washcloths, but in the UK, these are flannels. On a Cunard cruise, the cabins are cleaned twice a day, so as we were watching the sail away from the top deck, our room steward was making our cabin into night mode. They put down the blind, they moved these little blue cushions, and most importantly, they left us chocolates on the pillow. A lot of cruise lines have stopped doing this, but it is a classic cruise ship thing to do. They always left us a daily schedule, and I loved getting into bed and reading about what was happening the next day. It is also available in the app, but there is something nice about physically looking through it. I feel like a kid before Christmas who's circling the things that they want in a catalogue. The beds were incredibly comfortable, the covers were soft, and most of the time I slept here well, usually at night, but sometimes in the day when the motion was too much and I felt unwell. There are loads of ways to prevent and deal with seasickness, but I've never found any as good as just going to sleep and waking up when the seas are calmer. It's like fast forwarding the worst part. On this first night though, I really had no idea how rough the seas were going to get, and it wasn't a case of fast forwarding through the worst parts because it was rough almost every single day. As we fell asleep, we heard the distant music of a piano. We assumed that this was a pianist who was sitting in the atrium playing, but it wasn't. It was a piano in the atrium playing, but there wasn't a person. The next day we would be wandering by and we would see the piano playing itself. We were right above the piano, so it's not a surprise that we could hear it. It was a ghost pianist. I've stayed in some very loud cabins before, above bars, under theatres, so being near a piano really wasn't a problem. I will say it wasn't exactly relaxing piano, it was a bit sporadic. I think the ghost was just desperate to show off that she was good at piano, so she would play any old thing. As the cabin is over 20 years old, I was expecting to see some signs that she was worn down. There were a few clues that gave away the ship's age. There was an old hairdryer next to the new hairdryer for some reason, and also an ashtray in the bathroom, and you definitely can't smoke in these cabins. There were a few little stains and issues, but to be honest, I've seen these on ships that are only a couple of years old. We did have a problem with one of the lights, but that was fixed very fast. For me, it's far more important how a cruise line fixes a problem versus if there are problems, because there are always problems, and I don't mind as long as the cruise line fixes them, and Cunard fixed that light very quickly. The main thing for me was that the cabin was functional and clean, and it definitely was those two things. Everything worked, and all the things that we interacted with felt new. Some of the drawers were a bit tricky to open, but as these are the original doors from the early 2000s, I think I can forgive that. We had plenty of hanging space, and I put my suitcase underneath the bed. When I'd worn my clothes, I would just put them straight in there, and it was as if my suitcase packed itself. By the bed, we had 2 bedside tables, which were very helpful for keeping things like our pajamas or small items like headphones. It was on day 3 that the weather really took a turn for the worst. The captain, in his daily announcement, said that he would try to make us as comfortable as possible, which I do appreciate, but that does make me nervous. I am someone who does get seasick, and when I feel seasick, having access to fresh air is very helpful. They would close off the outside deck spaces when the weather got really bad, so I couldn't go out there to get any fresh air. That said though, this location in the middle of deck 6 has been fantastic, and I wouldn't have traded it for a balcony even with that fresh air. I want to stay right here. I did have to take seasickness pills for a few days on this cruise, but I took a cruise across the Atlantic in January. January. There was still movement in this cabin, of course. Things would rock around, even the toilet roll rolled away from me at one point, but the movement was a lot more in my parents' cabin. My dad actually spent a full day in my cabin just laying down because he felt seasick, and the movement was noticeably less here than in their cabin. Generally speaking, the further down and the more in the middle you are, the less that you feel the movement. When I booked this cruise, I made sure to tell my travel agent to tick the do not upgrade box on the booking. I'm so glad that I did that, and if you are ever booking a specific cabin because of a location, make sure you do that. What a cruise line considers an upgrade isn't always what we would consider an upgrade. They could have upgraded me to an ocean view that was right at the end of the ship, and that wouldn't have been good. It would have been nice to have been able to see the sea, I guess, of course, but on a cruise like this, it really is just the same ocean in every single direction for 8 days. In an inside cabin, there really is no way to know if it's 3 AM or 3 PM because it's pitch black. There was a little bit of light coming in around the door, but the window didn't let in any light, which was good because the atrium lights were on all the time. In that way, there wasn't really any benefit to us having this window, and most of the cruise we just had the blinds down. Our room steward would put them down whenever she made up the room, and we weren't really too bothered to open it that much. One day I did though, when I decided I will find my person to wave at. I'd never seen anybody in any of the cabins opposite, so I sent my dad down to the bottom of the atrium with my phone. I hope you like this clip that he recorded here. I don't think anybody else saw me, but it would have been quite funny if they did. Given the price I paid of £809, I was very happy with this room. I do understand that this is not for everybody, and this cruise route certainly isn't. I honestly don't think I'll be doing a transatlantic again. This many sea days just doesn't suit me, and being seasick really is miserable. This is the calmest day we've had, so I've decided to film this, but even still, we are rocking. I'm not sure if you can see things. To find out what cruise cabins are like at the other end of the scale, I'll show you around an incredible cabin that actually had a bath in it on board Norwegian Spirit. We certainly didn't have any issues with ghost pianists on that cruise, but we did have a few unexpected situations. I'll see you there in a minute.